hope you're enjoying the 40th anniversary dinner. TMEC's come a long way. I played, I guess, a part in that. I was the CEO for 20 years up until 2014. I'm retired now. I'll give you a bit of irony first. It was April 2006, and Matthew Gill, who was the general manager of the Beaconsfield mine, was the president of the Minerals Council at the time. And the landscape was looking pretty quiet, and I said to Matthew, look, I've got a mate of mine who's going to sail his yacht to New Zealand, and I wouldn't mind taking 3 weeks leave and going with him. I'd enjoy that trip. I'm a sailor. And Matt said, yeah, there's not much happening at the moment. It's a pretty quiet landscape, so yeah, it'd be a good time to take leave. We were halfway across the Tasman Sea and we listened to a news bulletin on Radio Australia's HF system, and they described the rockfall at the Beaconsfield mine. And I thought, yeah, I don't think that landscape's actually all that quiet. And Beaconsfield unfolded from there. Now, look, before I joined the Minerals Council, I had a long career in media, mainly with the ABC, covering politics and social issues with the odd disaster thrown in. And then I transferred to the Minerals Council as the CEO, but people thought that was a pretty weird transition, but in fact it wasn't, because the Minerals Council task was to represent the industry publicly, to deal with politicians and bureaucrats in the public service, write submissions, keep an eye on current events that affected the Minerals Council, and then work through them with the board and the directors and so forth and the sites. So that was a pretty easy transition. I just had to learn the mechanics of the industry, but I actually became quite knowledgeable, as you do when you hang around with geologists and mining engineers day in and day out. And I could, for example, during the Beaconsfield mine disaster, when the media was asking me technical questions, I was able to describe the sort of rock that they were trying to drill through and how it was formed and stuff like that, and some of the geotechnical aspects of mining that they were encountering and why it was difficult. I knew a bit of this, but certainly not all of it, and people thought I had an amazing knowledge, but what I actually had was an advisor on the site, a guy called Bill Colvin. Bill was a former general manager of the Henty gold mine and a mining engineer. And I used to say to Bill, look, I know they're going to ask me about all this sort of stuff. You know, how does it happen? What's it about? How do I describe it? Bill would inform me, and then I'd go and explain it to the media. So I sounded like the fountain of all wisdom, but actually Bill was. One of the things I was grateful for was that the general managers and representatives of the supply chain who made up the board were always able to get above the ruck. They could always divest themselves of competitive or any petty issues and work in the interests of the industry as a whole. They could elevate to the policy level really, really well. They didn't bicker over competitive issues, and they were, in fact, for 20 years, a pleasure to work for. And there's some real characters in the minerals industry. Some of them have an unorthodox sense of humour. One of them was a guy called Dick Potts, who was well known internationally, I guess, as a mining engineer and general manager of a mine. And Rosebery was hosting the emergency response competition. These are people who, are first responders if anything goes wrong at a remote mine site. They're incredibly well trained, but they have a competition to hone their skills every year. Well, they did at that stage. And it was really hard work. For 4 hours, they did what they had to do, carrying people in and out of mine shafts, rappelling down slopes, all that sort of thing, carrying all their gear. And Dick, being Dick, had organised that the finish line would be at the top of a fairly steep hill. So after 4 hours, with all their gear, they had to run up this really steep hill to get to the finish line, and they thought, wow, we've done it. Now, Dick had organised a log that would be something well over a metre in diameter, and he'd positioned it on trestles, and lying on it was an old-fashioned crosscut saw. And they had to, with all their gear on, grab the crosscut saw and saw through this enormous log before they walked the metre to the finish line. You should have seen the look of dismay on their faces, but my word, they were tough people. They did it and walked the last metre and just about collapsed on the floor. That was Dick's idea of humour. I guess geologists are somewhat renowned for being a bit quirky too. They used to name new discoveries of ore bodies or extensions of ore bodies after bizarre things. There was a quirky geologist working on the west coast, and he was intersecting an ore body, and he named them after Tasmanian potatoes. You know, Russet Burbank and King Edwards, Up to Date, Kennebec and Pink Eye and stuff like that. And I said to him, why did you name them like that? And he said, oh, well, you know, pretty obvious. He said, they grow underground and they're really tasty.